So, the first person I'm going to introduce to you is Devaki Jain from India. Now, I've been given terms for each one, and I know language can be limiting, but she's got the term bridger next to her. A feminist economist and activist, Devaki is internationally known for her innovative work on development. She has spent a career connecting academic and policy work and frequently contributes to government forums and civil society initiatives in the areas of equity, development, self-government, and population. She has contributed to the design of numerous policy and program task forces and of working groups established by the Government of India with special reference to women's economic empowerment.
I'm so glad that in the inclusive spirit of this World Women's Congress, they included elders like me, and I'm happy to see some other women with hair my color. It really is good to be able to continue to interact with different generations, and very often as we get older and less visible, we are put on the shelf, so we don't learn, as I learned just now from these two women. It was just so brilliant and exciting. Imagine if I hadn't come to this conference, I wouldn't have heard them. So I am grateful to the Congress and congratulate you. I was there at Uganda some years ago, and I see a much larger group here and also a much greater strength of what we are all about. So again, congratulations for the change. Breaking cycles, I was just sharing with Joanne that maybe the one that is really burning with me and has been something which I've walked with is how we women who belong to the so-called third world, as it used to be called, worked our way to challenge the domination both in vocabulary and in power of our sisters from the north. So let me begin at the beginning. I am a teacher, an economist. I belong to the Indian Women's Studies movement. I'm a founder of the Indian Association of Women's Studies, so I'm so glad there's a Women's Studies conference. And I was a scholar doing only research without feeling feminist. But I was invited to Mexico, and I walked in insipid scholar into the World Conference in Mexico and walked out a feminist. It was just like going into a beauty parlor with your face all pimpled and coming out. It was like that. You just had to be in that hall with 10,000 women whom you've never met before, just feeling like one big powerhouse. Many of us who were totally unaware of the women's movement just came out feeling absolutely fibrillating with excitement that there was something, an identity called women, and that we were charging ahead with new ideas and power. So from that beginning in '75, I never turned back, and I've been deeply involved in both the national and international feminist movement. But as we walked from '75 to '85, and I don't know, many of you here may have been in the development field, and you might have known that when we did that walk, we were often called by Scandinavians or Americans or Europeans to find out what we were like, especially those who were doing development. So third world women were called pre-Copenhagen, which was 1980. What do you women want? Or academics would call us and say, they are activists. They're going to tell us what's happening on the ground. Suddenly, many of us felt that there was a hierarchy here. There was a hierarchy where thought and ability to analyze and write belonged to our friends from the north who were actually aiding us, and we were there to pirouette and show what was happening in our poor, miserable, oppressive, patriarchal, obfuscated worlds. It didn't seem right, and you will see, I'm sure you as women's studies scholars, that much of the references that scholars use, whether men, women, is usually tethered in Western intellectual history. For example, in the book that I wrote, I found that there was something called the development decade. And then there was an issue why the UN was birthed was because of the Second World War, where Europe got emissarized and the Marshall Plan was made and the UN was born at that time. What was happening in South Africa at that time? Mandela was in jail. What was happening in our countries? We were fighting for freedom from the British. So the history as it is outlined in the major what we call the classical histories, is highly Eurocentric and highly Anglo-Saxon, and very often has intellectual powerhouses like John Stuart Mill or Rousseau, forgetting all the others that came in our country. So there were both intellectual, I wouldn't like to call it oppression, but domination, and the other was a sense that we can think and you can act. So I remember going to one conference in Copenhagen, called by a dear friend of mine, a Copenhagen Danish scholar, and it was about challenging theories. They were challenging Marx, Foucault, and Kant, and others who were inherited political scientists. And then they called me and said, there's Devaki Jain. She'll tell us now about how they've organized self-employed women in India. So I had already recognized that this was going to happen. So I got up and I spoke on a whole theoretical discourse. I deconstructed Foucault, I deconstructed Kant, and I spoke about the power of silence, totally away from what I was supposed to do, which is to dance on the activist role. And this was a way of this, and I must say, with real love and respect to my sisters from Scandinavia, Americas, they were so understanding of this. So understanding, and they suddenly recognized it. Another thing that used to happen was development experts from Ford Foundation and others would come, and they would write up what should be the outline for us, and then we would have to fill it. So this went on till 1980, and as I moved around the world and as I became a friend of other women from so-called third world, we decided that the time had come for us to show that the development format that the UN was using, which even now it continues to use, which is called gender equality, was in fact, and the second one was integrating women into development. These were two false starts. In Africa, Latin America, particularly Asia, women are working. They are already into development. Agricultural laborers in India, 63% are women. I have a friend here, Saraswati Raju, from the Joanne St. University. She's done geography maps on where women are working in India, the different sectors. And the same thing can be said of other South continents. So there we were already in development. You don't have to integrate us in. What we need is to understand where we are and make agricultural policies, industrial policies, which enable us to move upwards in income and in skills. So once that was sort of felt, I shared it with other women from the third world, or what is called the third world, which is now called the South, a more respectable name. And all of us met, and we decided that we should do something which defines what we would like out of a UN conference pre-Nairobi. And you'll be happy to know that when we met, and I did want to project the face of a woman who turned our minds called Fatima Marnisi. I wonder if anybody can do that for me. I sent it to the PowerPoint. We met in Bangalore, and we were given the UN format to fill in as a way to get to Nairobi. We put it all up, as we always do, on charts around the room. I held it in my parents' house. And suddenly Fatima Marnisi, this Moroccan feminist, who was one of the invitees, she got up and she tore off all the charts. She said, you're following an intellectual methodology of the Europeans. This is not the way we think in the South. Let us just talk to each other. And she just tore all the charts on which we were writing and said, this is completely false. What you should do is take the continent. What is the crisis in our continents? Africa had food, Latin America had debt, Asia had poverty. Let's see where we can enable the macroeconomic policies to change so that the women can walk forward. And that was the birth of Dawn, which opened up what is called macroeconomic policies and how they affect women. And to my mind, if you are talking of breaking cycles, I wouldn't claim to be a sole warrior in this, but a whole collective of us decided that we would define our own lives and define our own way of walking forward. And look at Fatima. She not only challenged the way we think, but she also argues that she wants the UN to have a UN for love. I mean, she uses words like love and dreams, and away from the way we think on what is dreams. She says dreams is reality. It is carpets on which you fly into new imaginations. So that's why I wanted to, I wish she was here. If anybody has done breaking cycles, it's Fatima Marnisi from Morocco. But unfortunately, she refuses to enter USA. because of the Iraqi invasion. So I'll leave it at that.
She wasn't allowed in?
No, she refuses.
Yes, tensions. I mean, I've already mentioned one tension between our sisters and ourselves, and that went on for quite some time. But following what you said about raising resources, I thought that particular point you made about Ford Foundation and the political space which Ford Foundation, that often has been one of our difficulties too. In fact, the first Dawn meeting, for those of you who know Development Alternatives for the New Era, was funded by Ford, and I'm grateful to them. And later on, we've done another book, which I'm hoping will be known to all of you in this conference, which is on redefining progress from a feminist perspective. You know, for those of us who are in the field of economics, one of the great tragedies is that progress and success has been defined as the gross national product, the GDP. And one never looks at what the GDP contains. Genevieve Vaughan is here, and I'm so happy to recognize her. She and others like Ryan Eisler and others have shown how unfortunate this measure is, because this measure takes us to places which are not where we want to go. It actually creates such inequality and such immiserization, which is going very deeply in countries like India and Africa. So we decided to look at all those measures, and 14 of us economists from North and South have done a book called Redefining Progress, Harvesting Feminist Knowledge. And by feminist knowledge, we mean what is called activist knowledge and scholarly knowledge. And often I feel that a feminist scholar is an activist. She learns and she drinks from the water of watching activism. And that's why I wanted to refer to another way of breaking cycles and taking this tension. And I wondered if the person can put up a chart called Women's Collective Action Chart, which I have. Basically what I'm trying to argue is that really breaking cycles is happening when you look at the organized struggles of women, especially at the bottom of the pile. Both of you have mentioned struggles yourself. But I'm talking of women who are deprived of water, fuel, whose infant mortality rate is high, the kind of poorest of the poor. It's amazing their innovative ideas. They have a challenge in front of them like the police. And most of us would not know what to do at a moment like that. But they all lay down and went on what Gandhi called satyagraha. And the police went away because they couldn't shoot lying down women. In Assam, they were going to take away the land which had been given for resettlement. The men didn't know what to do. So elephants were brought to crush the hutments. Can you imagine, on the spot, these women decided to do a ritual on the elephant, which is to burn camphor and move what is called arti in India, which they thought would appease the elephants. And indeed they did, and the elephants turned and walked away. Now, it's true, I mean, this is a true story, I'm not making it up. And the woman who told it to me was one of the heroines, called Shakuntala Devi, and I'm so happy that one of the speakers at the plenary said, we have such heroic women, but we haven't written about them, they're not known. We know Eleanor Roosevelt, we know someone else, but we don't know these women. So I put up that chart to show you, at least in 10 stories I wrote for a lecture that I gave as the president of the Women's Studies Association, showed innovative ways in which they are breaking methodology of resistance, methodology of climbing over oppression, methodology of fighting battles for themselves. It is so brilliant that I thought that is both a tension and a learning from the tension. And I often feel we don't know enough on those methodologies, and that's where we have to have a whole learning experience to challenge the state, which is the biggest, the biggest problem now with state and definitions in economics.
Thank you.
Maybe this is the time one can talk about something personal. Though the letter I got said speak about your personal story in terms of breaking a cycle, I did not do that because I'm so much concerned about the bigger space where all of us, including Canada, are losing out on the way countries are imagining they're economically succeeding, because of the inequality and other things. But it is true that I had my own struggle, that I come from a family where the girls were married pre-puberty and married only within a very narrow community. So most of the girls were not allowed to go to school, but nothing more than that. And my elder sister was just 4 years older than me, was married pre-puberty, and that was what was also on the agenda for me. And I had 4 brothers with 3 sisters, all younger than the brothers. They were all cycling and going to movies and playing tennis. I cannot say that I had a feminist consciousness. That's why I didn't like to tell the story, because it's not that I suddenly said, oh, I must fight for my rights. There was nothing as explicit as that. All I know is that I didn't want to get into what happened to my sister. So nudging and budging and crying and screaming and doing well in my studies, I managed to escape that particular, let us say, path. And the other end of the story is that apart from breaking away from the path, I did not marry till I was 33, and I married somebody who was out of my caste. And as a result of my marriage, I was told never to return to the house. So when I had my 2 babies, I had them alone in a hospital with my husband sitting and holding my hand, because neither family would accept an intercaste marriage at the time. So in one sense, you could say, yes, I broke a cycle, and as a result, my my nieces and others who followed me in this large Brahmin Orthodox community were able also to go to college and were able to marry who they wanted. So someone has to do that first shock to the family with all the repercussions of being excluded and ostracized and so on, and then it settles down. So that was something that I did do, but the flip side is, if when you tell your story you say that, you make yourself into a hero. And I think if you are living in countries like India, and I'm sure in Canada, but you really do not want to show your heroism, because the women who are at the very bottom of the pile, who are struggling for water and food and survival, they are heroines, but they are not recognized as heroines. So that's why when I'm asked by American journalists and others, we want to write your story, and I say, no, sorry, don't. I'm not yet ready to be. Maybe when I'm 94, if I live that long, somebody could write, because it won't matter to me. I might have forgotten. But, but at the moment, one doesn't want to make that individual heroism the story, but that is a breaking cycle which had its repercussions. But I want to spend 1 minute on space. I think the notion of space is very important for us right now at this Women's World Congress. We come from very different interests. I mean, my 2 young colleagues on the panel are so different from me in the world they are working in. I feel like asking them, have you been to India or have you been to Africa? Do you know what's happening does economics and the whole range of issues that economics draws attention to and development does it impinge on you? I would love to ask that, because I know that the people that you are working with, the Cherokees and others, I've met some of the leaders of the First World women. There is an issue there also of being excluded from economic opportunities and so on. So at some point, it's so important for all of us also to talk about economic opportunities for those who've been denied, and the other is to talk about gross inequality, which is actually which is, in my view, causing some of the conflicts and the terror that we see. And the final thing is what Fatima Marnisi taught me when this Tahrir Square was going on. I rang her up, I said, what's happening? She said, it's our moment, Devaki. Because when we met her, she told us, she's written a story called The Digital Sherazad, which you must read. She has a website. She told us 10 years ago that internet and transnational TV had transformed the perception of women from belly dancers to politically intelligent anchors of those TV channels. She said those women had been emancipated from 2 oppressors, patriarchy and the conservative mullah, the priest. That was 10 years ago. She anticipated this. And now, as you know, what's happening in that region, it's mixed up, I know, but it still is an uprising because of what we call the digital revolution. Now, sitting in India and Beijing +5, when I never realized what was happening there on digital revolution. So she said, when we went and said to her, we are against globalization, we're going to organize alternatives. She said, women can build peace into globalization. Don't reject globalization. It has brought us digital revolution. Build peace within that. See that globalization also creates an economic just world. I thought that was such a brilliant message to those of us who go to World Social Forum and say we are against capitalism, we are against this, we are against that. It was a positive message which I thought I would bring to your attention. I love that message. I think that could be the message for the Congress. But I want to put a hook on that, or maybe trip it up a bit, you know. That is, I was thinking as you were speaking how interesting and how possible and how not to feel oppressed and so on. And I don't want to overdo the statement about the way the lives of those who are living in the poorer spaces of developing countries. Remember that in developing countries, there is no unemployment insurance. I often think of unemployment in America where still you get some dole, or in Britain. I once read a story, which in Britain, those who are unemployed and they get some dole, they get enough to go and drink beer at the pub every Saturday, you know? I mean, you have all kinds of things. You have health insurance. These women and men, if they don't have an income that day, they just drop off dead, you know? I mean, death is a daily event for a child or somebody. And I don't want to exaggerate that, and yet it's a reality. And so to expect them not to feel oppressed would be unfair, if not unrealistic. But one thought I had, which I'd like to leave with the Congress, is there are many issues, and I'm sure you come from various disciplines and cultures, but I've often felt over the last 20, 40 years that I've been walking this journey of international feminist movement, national, UN, that some kind of solidarity in an idea. You know, one idea which we all take as our idea for next, say, 3-4 years. We do advocacy with our governments on the same, UN and so on, so that there is a solidarity in the idea. You may say, what do you mean by that? I'll give you one little example if there is time. Is there time? 2 more minutes? That you must have heard of how Mahatma Gandhi got freedom for India in a non-violent struggle. And of course, he mobilized a lot of illiterate, poor people without having internet or any of those things. But he decided that he would do a long march to the beaches of a state called Gujarat and pick up a fistful of salt, because salt was a monopoly of the British. So he wanted all the people of India to do what is called civil disobedience and fill the jails with disobeying the English law. And he picked up a silly little thing called salt because it was something critical to everybody, poor and rich. And with that fistful of salt, he mobilized India to disobey the British, go to jails, and finally the British left. If we could have an idea, and one of the ideas I am fostering in my mind, but it may not work unless we dialogue in this conference, have more subgroups, is inequality. Not inequality only related to gender. I think one of the traps that the UN has gotten us into is looking only at gender inequality. How many wages for men, what are the wages for women, what's the health for men, the real issue is the bigger inequality that you talked about and you talked about, that such a small percentage of people are owning so much of the wealth and they can play cards with it across the globe. And our voice as an international feminist, especially women's studies scholars, should have something to say on that. Something to say that, look, we are not interested only in catching up with men, getting the same wages, having our care economy worked out into number of hours of work, number of money that I should also get because I'm housekeeping. No, let us talk about the bigger, dangerous situation in the world of inequality. And because of the paradigm that the whole globe followed in economic progress, both India and America and everybody else, what we have in the Middle East is a result of that. Deprivation, exclusion is one of the words you've used in this conference. Those who are excluded from the cookies that came out of the economy, like selling petrol to America, are objecting to the fact that the cookies were not shared with them. And of course there were dictators there, but it is also true the economic program excluded the masses from the advantages of that economy. So as peace builders in the world, I think of feminists as peace builders, as people who can do thought and action together, who integrate everything in their housework and their public work. We have to think about this terrible pressure of global and national inequality and see if we can say that is our flag. We would like to overcome inequality, whatever way. I have got no solutions. But I just want to leave that thought as the thought for this space. Thanking you for giving it.
Imagine